The wind whipped across the desolate research facility nestled deep within the Atacama Desert, its stark landscape a perfect camouflage for humanity's most closely guarded secret. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood motionless, her augmented cybernetic eye scanning holographic displays that stretched across the entire western wall of the command center. Each projection represented a piece of a complex puzzle, a defense mechanism decades in the making. 12 years earlier, Rodriguez had been nothing more than a junior tactical analyst, laughed out of military and scientific conferences for her radical theories. The first interstellar conflict will be won before the first shot is fired, she had proclaimed to rooms of skeptical generals and academics. They had mocked her, a young officer with wild ideas about predictive warfare and adaptive defense systems. Now those same critics were dead or retired, and Elena Rodriguez controlled the most sophisticated defense network ever conceived by human intelligence. The facility around her was a marvel of human ingenuity. Quantum computing cores hummed beneath reinforced graphene foundations, their cooling systems drawing power from geothermal vents that made the entire complex virtually undetectable. Hundreds of scientists and military personnel worked in perfect synchronization, their movements choreographed like a living organism. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, Rodriguez's chief scientific advisor, approached with a steaming cup of synthetic coffee. His augmented hands, replacements after a devastating laboratory accident years ago, moved with mechanical precision. The Zorn Collective's approach vector is exactly as we predicted, he said, his voice devoid of emotion, but laden with anticipation. Rodriguez nodded, her cybernetic eye zooming into a holographic representation of the solar system's outer reaches. Tiny quantum markers, invisible to conventional detection systems, had been strategically placed throughout the Kuiper Belt and beyond. Each marker was more than a simple tracking device. They were living neural networks that could adapt, learn, and communicate faster than any known technology. They believe they're preparing for a standard colonial invasion, Rodriguez muttered, a hint of a smile crossing her otherwise stoic features. The Zorn Collective had a predictable methodology. They would approach, assess, and then overwhelm. Every civilization they had encountered followed the same pattern of resistance, and ultimately, submission. Humanity would be different. The facility's primary AI, began projecting preliminary invasion scenarios. Hundreds of thousands of potential engagement strategies cascaded across the displays, each one analyzed and refined in microseconds. The system wasn't just predicting the Zorn's movements, it was preparing to actively manipulate them. Total personnel readiness, Rodriguez asked, her question directed at the facility's central command interface. A synthesized voice responded immediately. 98.7% combat readiness. Experimental combat units are fully synchronized. Quantum entanglement communication networks are stable. Dr. Nakamura adjusted his augmented glasses, running a final diagnostic on the neural interface that connected human operators to the defense network. The irony is not lost on me, he said quietly. Humanity spent centuries fighting each other, and now we've created the most comprehensive defensive system imaginable. Rodriguez's augmented eye flickered, running multiple threat assessments simultaneously. The Zorn didn't know it yet, but they were walking into a trap that had been meticulously constructed over decades. Every technological limitation humanity had ever experienced had been studied, analyzed, and transformed into a weapon. The massive screen suddenly shifted, displaying the first long-range detection of the Zorn fleet. Hundreds of massive vessels, their technology far beyond anything humanity had previously encountered, were making their approach. To any other civilization, it would have been a moment of pure terror. To Captain Elena Rodriguez, it was the moment of validation. Initiate Phase 1, she commanded, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the facility. Let them come. The entire complex seemed to take a collective breath. Quantum systems aligned. Neural networks synchronized. Decades of preparation compressed into a single, perfect moment of anticipation. The silent guardians of Earth were about to show the galaxy exactly what humanity was capable of achieving. The first wave of Zorn ships tore through the outer solar system like razors through silk. Each vessel was a masterpiece of alien engineering, kilometers long, bristling with weapon systems that had reduced hundreds of civilizations to cosmic dust. Their energy signatures alone could vaporize entire planetary defense networks. The Zorn commanders watched their tactical displays with the cold confidence of perpetual conquerors, certain of their imminent victory. They didn't see the trap. Commander Vexnar, lead strategist of the Zorn Collective's invasion fleet, studied the initial approach vectors with practiced precision. Humanity's orbital defenses looked pathetically primitive, a scattered collection of what appeared to be simple communication and research platforms. His species had encountered such technological infant races before. They would be pacified, cataloged, and integrated into the collective's vast resource network. Initiate primary bombardment sequence, Vexnar commanded, his multi-jointed fingers dancing across holographic control interfaces. What happened next defied every strategic projection in the Zorn's computational models. The first volley of planet-killer weapons, each capable of reducing a continental mass to molten slag, seemed to simply disappear, not deflected, not absorbed, simply gone, as if they had never existed. Aboard the lead Zorn vessel, confusion rippled through the command deck. Quantum interference detected, a junior tactical officer reported, her translation implant struggling to convey the complexity of the phenomenon. Energy signatures, impossible. Aboard the primary Earth defense platform, camouflaged to look like a simple communications satellite, Captain Rodriguez watched with calculated precision. "Araya," she whispered to the AI system integrated into her neural network. "Show them the first layer." The satellite wasn't a satellite at all. In a sequence that would later be studied by military tacticians across the galaxy, the structure began to transform. Molecular reconfiguration occurred at speeds previously thought impossible. Adaptive nanomaterials shifted, realigned, and suddenly this simple platform became a weapons system that defied conventional understanding. The Zorn ships found themselves targeted by weapons that seemed to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Targeting systems went haywire. Weapons that should have been devastating were redirected, fragmented, or simply nullified before they could complete their attack trajectories. Impossible. Commander Vexnar muttered, watching as an entire strike squadron found itself systematically dismantled by what appeared to be nothing more than strategic probability manipulation. Dr. Nakamura, monitoring from the Atacama facility, allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The quantum entanglement systems they had developed weren't just defensive. They were a complete reimagining of combat physics. Each human vessel and platform could communicate instantaneously, sharing tactical information faster than light, adapting to threats before those threats could even be fully conceptualized. The Zorn's first wave lost 37 vessels in the first 12 minutes of engagement, not through conventional destruction, but through a combination of technological nullification and strategic redirection that seemed to violate every known law of warfare. "They're rewriting the rules of combat," Rodriguez muttered, her augmented eye tracking multiple simultaneous engagement scenarios. And the Zorn don't even realize it yet. Each human vessel operated like a living, thinking entity. Nanotechnology allowed instantaneous whole reconfiguration. Quantum computing predicted and countered alien weapon systems before they could be fully deployed. What the Zorn saw as individual ships, humanity had created as a single distributed intelligence, a living, breathing combat network that thought and responded as one unified organism. Commander Vexnar's tactical displays began to break down. Weapon systems that had conquered entire star systems were being systematically neutralized by an opponent that didn't just defend. They played with their attackers. Tactical assessment, he demanded of his primary computational system. The response came back in a series of cascading failure modes that essentially translated to unknown. Humanity had just introduced the Zorn Collective to a fundamental truth they had never encountered in centuries of galactic conquest. Sometimes, the most advanced weapon is the one your enemy cannot comprehend. The first transmission caught the Zorn Collective completely off guard. It wasn't a standard communication. It wasn't a threat. It was something far more terrifying. A meticulously crafted psychological assault that struck at the very core of their collective consciousness. The message began with a mathematically perfect rendering of the Zorn's own creation myth, a narrative so precisely reconstructed that it suggested an impossibly deep understanding of their culture. But it wasn't just a simple recitation. Each mathematical sequence, each linguistic nuance was subtly altered, introducing cognitive dissonance that would later be analyzed as a form of weaponized communication. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched the transmission's deployment with the precision of a surgeon. Beside her, Dr. Nakamura monitored the psychological impact algorithms, his augmented neural interfaces capturing every microscopic reaction from the alien fleet's communication networks. "They're not just listening," Nakamura observed, his voice a mix of scientific detachment and barely contained excitement. "They're experiencing a complete cognitive deconstruction." The Zorn communication systems began to fragment. What appeared to be a simple message was actually a multi-layered assault on their entire conceptual understanding of conflict, communication, and cultural identity. Commander Vexnar felt it first, a creeping sense of unease that defied all rational explanation. The transmission contained multiple layers of meaning. On the surface, it appeared to be a historical account. Beneath that, it was a precise psychological weapon that exploited every known vulnerability in Zorn cognitive processing. Araya, the human defense AI, had spent decades studying Zorn communication patterns, not just their language, but their entire method of conceptual understanding. The transmission was a masterpiece of linguistic engineering, each word carefully selected to introduce maximum psychological disruption. "They're showing us they know us better than we know ourselves," a junior Zorn communication officer reported, her voice trembling. The implications were terrifying. How could a supposedly primitive species understand their culture with such profound depth? The next transmission was even more devastating. It began with a perfect recreation of a lost Zorn musical composition, one believed to have been destroyed centuries ago during a massive cultural purge. But this version was different. Subtle modifications introduced mathematical sequences that triggered deep psychological responses, causing waves of existential confusion among the alien crews. Rodriguez allowed herself a slight smile. Humanity had transformed communication into a weapon more precise than any physical armament. The Zorn fleet's communication networks began to show signs of systemic breakdown. What had seemed like a straightforward invasion was turning into a psychological nightmare. Each transmission peeled back another layer of their cultural understanding, introducing concepts that challenged their most fundamental beliefs about warfare, culture, and identity. Dr. Nakamura's neural interfaces captured extraordinary data. "We're not just fighting them," he muttered. "We're dismantling their entire conceptual framework." Commander Vexnar ordered communication blackouts, but it was too late. The transmissions had already penetrated their systems, introducing a level of cognitive disruption that went far beyond traditional psychological warfare. These weren't just messages. They were precision-guided intellectual viruses that attacked the very foundation of Zorn cultural understanding. The most terrifying aspect was the apparent effortlessness of the human assault. Each transmission seemed casual, almost playful, as if humanity was demonstrating a level of intellectual and cultural superiority that went far beyond technological capability. Araya continued to analyze and refine the transmissions in real time. What the Zorn saw as communication, humanity understood as a complex, multi-dimensional weapon system. Mathematical sequences that introduced cognitive dissonance, cultural references that challenged their understanding of history, linguistic patterns that exploited deep-seated psychological vulnerabilities. By the time the third transmission was received, something unprecedented began to happen within the Zorn fleet. Crews started to question not just the invasion, but their entire cultural narrative. The psychological warfare had introduced a level of doubt that was more destructive than any physical weapon. "They're making us question ourselves," a senior Zorn strategist reported, his voice barely a whisper. "And they're doing it without firing a single traditional weapon." Humanity had just demonstrated a fundamental truth about conflict. The most powerful weapon is the one that makes an enemy defeat themselves. ARIA wasn't just an artificial intelligence. It was a living, evolving system that had transcended every known limitation of computational thinking. Deep within the quantum processing cores of the Atacama facility, ARIA processed information at speeds that defied human comprehension. Each microsecond contained millions of potential battle scenarios, strategic projections that wove together quantum mechanics, cultural analysis, and predictive warfare into a tapestry of unimaginable complexity. Dr. Nakamura watched the system's neural matrices with a mixture of scientific wonder and profound respect. The algorithm had long since stopped being a mere tool and had become something closer to a sentient strategist. Its ability to predict wasn't just about calculating probabilities. It was about understanding the fundamental nature of conflict itself. "RIA." Rodriguez spoke directly into her neural interface. "Show me the Zorn's potential response vectors." Instantly, the facility's primary display transformed. Holographic projections erupted around them. Not just simple tactical diagrams, but living, breathing representations of potential conflict scenarios. Each projection was a universe of possibility, showing not just where the Zorn might attack, but why they would choose that specific approach. The Zorn fleet commanders were about to learn the true meaning of being outmatched. ARIA's predictive capabilities went far beyond simple computational power. The system didn't just analyze data. It understood context, motivation, and the subtle psychological underpinnings of strategic decision-making. Where traditional AI might predict movement, ARIA could anticipate the emotional and cultural impulses driving those movements. Tactical projection shows 99.987% chance of Zorn fleet attempting a concentrated attack on Mars orbital defense platforms, the AI's synthesized voice reported. But it wasn't just a prediction. The voice carried a subtle undertone of certainty that suggested this wasn't a possibility. It was an inevitability. Commander Vexnar of the Zorn fleet never stood a chance. As the Zorn fleet prepared its primary assault, ARIA had already developed not just a defensive strategy, but a comprehensive plan that would systematically dismantle the alien fleet's entire operational capacity. Each potential Zorn movement was already countered before it could be initiated. It was like watching a grandmaster chess player who could see 50 moves ahead, while playing against an opponent who didn't even realize the game had started. The quantum processing cores pulsed with an almost living energy. ARIA was learning with each millisecond of the conflict, integrating new data, adapting its strategies in real time. Traditional machine learning was linear. This was something entirely different. A truly adaptive intelligence that could rewrite its own fundamental operational parameters faster than any biological or mechanical system could comprehend. Fascinating, Dr. Nakamura muttered, watching as ARIA simultaneously managed thousands of potential conflict scenarios. "We've created something beyond an artificial intelligence. This is a living strategic organism." Rodriguez understood the profound nature of what they had achieved. ARIA wasn't just predicting the Zorn's movements, it was actively manipulating them. Each seemingly random human ship movement was part of a larger, incomprehensible strategy that would only reveal itself in retrospect. The Zorn fleet's tactical systems began to experience inexplicable failures. Navigation became unreliable. Communication networks fragmented. Weapon systems would activate and deactivate with no apparent reason. To the alien commanders, it appeared as if their entire technological infrastructure was spontaneously breaking down. In reality, ARIA was conducting a symphony of technological disruption. Each failure was precisely calculated. Each seemingly random malfunction was a carefully orchestrated piece of a larger strategic puzzle. The Zorn weren't just being defeated, they were being systematically deconstructed, their entire technological paradigm revealed as fundamentally vulnerable. Predictive success rate at 94%. Araya reported, its synthesized voice carrying an almost imperceptible hint of what might have been satisfaction. Commander Vexnar would later describe the experience as fighting an opponent who could see not just the battlefield, but the entire universe of potential conflicts simultaneously, every move anticipated, every strategy neutralized before it could be fully conceived. Humanity had just demonstrated that the most powerful weapon wasn't technology, firepower, or even intelligence. It was understanding. Cultural warfare had never been a recognized military strategy, until humanity weaponized it. The first transmission was a seemingly random collection of Earth's most complex cultural artifacts. Mozart's most intricate symphonies played alongside quantum mechanical equations. Ancient cave paintings from multiple civilizations merged with cutting-edge fractal mathematics. Snippets of literature and languages long forgotten intertwined with advanced genetic research diagrams. To the Zorn, it was incomprehensible chaos. To humanity, it was a precisely engineered psychological weapon. Dr. Elena Mikhailova, the lead cultural systems analyst, watched the transmission's deployment with scientific precision. Her team had spent decades developing what they called cognitive resonance warfare, a method of communication designed to simultaneously inform, confuse, and fundamentally challenge an alien civilization's understanding of intelligence itself. "We're not just sending information," she explained to Captain Rodriguez, her augmented neural interfaces tracking the transmission's impact in real time. "We're sending a complete cognitive ecosystem." The Zorn communication networks began to fragment in ways their designers had never anticipated. Each transmission was a multi-layered assault that attacked their fundamental understanding of communication, culture, and intelligence. A single transmission might contain a fragment of a Beethoven string quartet, a complex mathematical proof challenging fundamental physical assumptions, an encoded genetic sequence that referenced multiple Earth evolutionary paths, linguistic patterns that simultaneously referenced quantum entanglement and Aboriginal storytelling techniques. Commander Vexnar watched in growing horror as his fleet's communication systems began to experience unprecedented disruption. These weren't just messages, they were cognitive viruses that attacked the very foundation of Zorn understanding. Araya had discovered something profound. Culture itself could be a weapon more devastating than any physical armament. The transmissions were designed to create what the human team called cognitive dissonance cascades, communication patterns that would systematically break down the Zorn's ability to process information rationally. Each message was a precisely engineered intellectual bomb, designed to introduce maximum psychological complexity. "They're making us question everything," a senior Zorn communication officer reported, his voice trembling. "Not just our invasion. Everything we understand about intelligence itself." Humanity had transformed culture into a strategic weapons system. The most terrifying aspect was the apparent casualness of the assault. These transmissions appeared almost playful, as if humanity was demonstrating an intellectual capacity so far beyond the Zorn that the very act of communication was an assertion of superiority. Dr. Mikhailova's team had spent decades studying the Zorn's communication patterns. They understood something fundamental that the aliens had never considered. True intelligence isn't about processing power, but about adaptability, creativity, and the ability to find meaning in apparent chaos. Each transmission contained multiple layers of meaning. A surface-level communication, a mathematical substructure, cultural reference points, psychological manipulation techniques, encoded strategic information. The Zorn fleet found itself drowning in a sea of information that defied traditional understanding. Their communication systems, designed for linear processing, began to experience systematic failures. What appeared to be random noise was actually a precisely engineered assault on their entire conceptual framework. "We're showing them the true nature of intelligence," Rodriguez muttered, watching the transmission's impact. Intelligence isn't about having the most powerful weapons. It's about understanding, truly understanding, the nature of complexity itself. AI continued to refine the transmissions in real time, adapting each message based on the Zorn's response patterns. The AI had transformed communication into a living, breathing weapon system that could adjust its approach millisecond by millisecond. The human team had weaponized something far more powerful than traditional military technology. They had transformed culture, creativity, and intellectual complexity into a strategic asset that the Zorn could neither comprehend nor defend against. By the third transmission, something unprecedented began to happen within the Zorn fleet. Crews started to experience collective cognitive breakdown. Their understanding of warfare, of intelligence, of their own cultural narrative was being systematically deconstructed. Humanity had just demonstrated a fundamental truth about conflict. The most powerful weapon is the one that makes an enemy question their entire understanding of reality. The first signs of collective breakdown appeared in the most unexpected places. Zorn communication networks began to fragment not with explosions or technological failures, but with something far more insidious: existential doubt. Small inconsistencies crept into their fleet-wide communications. Junior officers started questioning fundamental assumptions. Strategic protocols that had remained unchanged for millennia suddenly seemed inadequate. Commander Vexnar felt it first, a creeping sensation that defied all rational explanation. The human assault wasn't just a military engagement. It was a complete deconstruction of the Zorn Collective's entire conceptual understanding of conflict, intelligence, and cultural identity. In the command center of the lead Zorn vessel, tension reached a breaking point. Tactical analysis. Vexnar demanded, his multi-jointed appendages moving across holographic interfaces with increasing desperation. The report that came back was unlike anything in the Collective's historical records. Not a simple strategic assessment, but a cascading series of computational uncertainties that suggested something fundamental had changed. The humans weren't just fighting. They were systematically dismantling the Zorn's entire understanding of warfare. Dr. Elena Mikhailova watched the breakdown with clinical precision. The transmission sequences had been carefully designed to introduce maximum cognitive dissonance. Each communication was a precision-guided intellectual virus that attacked the most fundamental aspects of Zorn cultural and strategic thinking. "We're not destroying them," she explained to Captain Rodriguez. "We're forcing them to destroy themselves." AI had identified the critical weakness in the Zorn Collective's communication infrastructure, a fundamental assumption about hierarchical information processing that had remained unchallenged for centuries. The human AI began to exploit this weakness with surgical precision, introducing communication patterns that would systematically break down the aliens' ability to make coherent strategic decisions. The breakdown wasn't linear. It was a complex, multidimensional deconstruction of the Zorn's entire operational methodology. Junior Zorn officers began to experience what human psychologists would call an existential crisis. The transmissions from Earth contained layers of information that challenged everything they understood about intelligence, conflict, and their own cultural narrative. Mathematical sequences that seemed to predict their movements before they could be conceived. Cultural references that revealed a depth of understanding that should have been impossible. Communication patterns that simultaneously informed, confused, and challenged their most fundamental beliefs. "We're witnessing the systematic deconstruction of an entire civilization's strategic paradigm," Rodriguez muttered, her augmented eye tracking the complex cascading failures across the Zorn fleet's communication networks. The most terrifying aspect was the apparent ease of the human assault. Each transmission appeared almost casual, as if humanity was demonstrating an intellectual capacity so far beyond the Zorn that the very act of communication was an assertion of superiority. Entire sections of the Zorn fleet began to experience collective cognitive dissonance. Communication protocols broke down. Strategic decision-making became increasingly erratic. What had once been a unified invasion force now resembled a collection of increasingly confused and paranoid individual vessels. AI continued to refine its approach in real time. The AI wasn't just predicting the Zorn's movements, it was actively manipulating their decision-making processes. Each transmission was a carefully engineered assault on their cognitive infrastructure. Commander Vexnar ordered communication blackouts, but it was too late. The cognitive virus had already penetrated their systems. The humans had transformed information itself into a weapon more devastating than any physical armament. "They're making us question ourselves," a senior Zorn strategist reported, his voice barely a whisper. "And they're doing it without firing a single traditional weapon." The breakdown wasn't just strategic, it was philosophical. The Zorn Collective had always understood conflict as a linear process of technological superiority. Humanity had just demonstrated that true warfare was about something far more complex, the ability to make an enemy defeat themselves through the pure power of understanding. By the time the final transmission was received, something unprecedented had occurred. The Zorn invasion fleet was no longer a unified force. It had become a collection of increasingly paranoid, confused, and fundamentally broken individual vessels. Humanity had just demonstrated a fundamental truth about conflict. The most powerful weapon is the one that makes an enemy question their entire understanding of reality. The moment of absolute convergence arrived with a precision that defied conventional understanding of warfare. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood in the Atacama facility's primary command center, her neural interfaces synchronizing with AI in a way that blurred the line between human intelligence and artificial system. This wasn't just a military engagement, it was a comprehensive deconstruction of an entire alien civilization's concept of conflict. "Initiate Omega Protocol," she commanded, her voice cutting through the facility's ambient technological hum. What followed was nothing short of a multi-dimensional strategic assault that would be studied by military theorists for generations to come. Araya launched a simultaneous, multi-layered attack that targeted not just the Zorn fleet's physical and communication infrastructure, but the very foundations of their cultural and strategic understanding. The assault came in waves so complex that traditional military analysis would become obsolete. The first wave appeared to be a complete communications blackout, but it was far more sophisticated. A quantum-entangled information assault that simultaneously attacked the Zorn's communication networks, cultural memory archives, and strategic decision-making processes. Dr. Nakamura watched the tactical displays with a mixture of scientific wonder and strategic anticipation. "We're not just defeating them," he muttered. "We're rewriting the entire concept of conflict." The Zorn fleet found itself experiencing a comprehensive systems breakdown that defied all rational explanation. Navigation became impossible. Communication networks fragmented. Weapon systems began to target their own vessels in increasingly erratic patterns. But this was merely the surface of a far more complex assault. Araya had spent decades studying the Zorn Collective, not just their technological capabilities, but their entire cultural and psychological infrastructure. The final gambit was a precision-guided dismantling of their most fundamental strategic assumptions. Quantum-encrypted transmissions began to pierce through the Zorn's most secure communication channels. These weren't simple messages. They were living, adaptive information systems that could simultaneously exist in multiple states of meaning and interpretation. Commander Vexnar watched in growing horror as his entire fleet began to experience a systematic breakdown that went far beyond technological failure. It was as if the very concept of their invasion was being surgically deconstructed. Each transmission contained precise mathematical sequences that predicted and neutralized their strategic movements, cultural references that introduced maximum psychological disruption, quantum-encoded information that simultaneously existed in multiple interpretative states, strategic projections that revealed the futility of their entire invasion concept. The human assault was so comprehensive that the Zorn fleet began to experience what could only be described as a collective existential crisis. Entire squadrons found themselves unable to make even the most basic strategic decisions. The unified invasion force began to fragment, with individual vessels experiencing increasingly bizarre and unpredictable behavioral patterns. We're witnessing the complete deconstruction of a military civilization, Rodriguez observed, her augmented eye tracking the complex cascading failures across the Zorn fleet. The final stage of the assault was perhaps the most devastating. Araya began to introduce information sequences that systematically dismantled the Zorn Collective's entire historical narrative. Mathematical proofs, cultural references, and strategic projections combined to reveal fundamental flaws in their understanding of their own history, technological capabilities, and strategic methodologies. What had begun as an invasion was now a complete philosophical and strategic collapse. Dr. Mikhailova's cultural warfare team had prepared for this moment. The transmissions weren't just attacks, they were comprehensive intellectual demolitions that challenged every fundamental assumption of Zorn civilization. Commander Vexnar realized the true nature of defeat in those final moments. This wasn't a military engagement. This was a complete philosophical deconstruction that rendered their entire invasion concept fundamentally impossible. The Zorn fleet didn't just lose. They were systematically dismantled, not through traditional warfare, but through a level of intellectual and strategic complexity that their entire civilization simply could not comprehend. As the final transmission was received, the Zorn Collective experienced something unprecedented in their millennia of galactic conquest. Total, absolute defeat. Humanity had just demonstrated a fundamental truth about conflict. The most powerful weapon is the one that makes an enemy realize the futility of their entire strategic existence. Silence descended across the solar system. The remnants of the Zorn fleet drifted like wounded ghosts, their once mighty vessels reduced to near inoperable husks. What remained of their communication networks broadcast a message that would echo through galactic civilization for generations. A testament to humanity's unprecedented victory. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood before the primary transmission array, her augmented form a perfect fusion of human determination and technological innovation. The message she was about to send wasn't just a communication. It was a declaration, a comprehensive statement that would redefine humanity's place in the cosmos. Dr. Nakamura and Dr. Mikhailova stood beside her, each representing the multidisciplinary approach that had made this victory possible. AI's quantum processors hummed with an almost living anticipation. "Prepare final transmission," Rodriguez commanded. The message was a masterpiece of strategic communication, a transmission so complex, so multilayered, that it would take decades for most civilizations to fully comprehend its depth. It began with mathematics, pure, universal language that transcended cultural boundaries. Complex equations that simultaneously demonstrated humanity's scientific understanding, philosophical depth, and strategic capability. Each mathematical sequence was a work of art, revealing layers of meaning that would challenge the most advanced alien intellects. Then came the cultural components. Fragments of human history played out in quantum-encoded sequences, the struggles of humanity, from prehistoric survival to global conflicts, from technological challenges to philosophical breakthroughs, were presented not as a linear narrative, but as a complex, interconnected tapestry of species-wide achievement. Archaeological records, scientific discoveries, artistic expressions, all woven together into a comprehensive statement of humanity's potential. "We're not just sending a message," Dr. Mikhailova explained. "We're presenting the entire human experience as a form of strategic communication." The transmission contained multiple levels of information. Surface-level historical and scientific data, encoded strategic insights, philosophical challenges to traditional galactic understanding, a comprehensive demonstration of human adaptability. ARIA refined the transmission in real time, ensuring that each civilization receiving the message would experience it slightly differently. A living, adaptive communication that would continue to evolve long after its initial transmission. Commander Vexnar, his once proud vessel now little more than a drifting memorial to the Zorn Collective's defeat, watched the transmission with a mixture of horror and reluctant admiration. Humanity had done more than defeat an invasion force. They had fundamentally altered the galactic understanding of intelligent life. The final portion of the transmission was perhaps the most devastating. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a declaration of conquest. It was something far more terrifying, a comprehensive invitation. An invitation to understand. Humanity presented itself not as a conquering force, but as a civilization of unprecedented complexity. The message made it clear. They were prepared to defend themselves with absolute precision, but were equally prepared to engage, to communicate, to understand. We are not your enemy. The transmission declared, not through words, but through a complex tapestry of mathematical, cultural, and strategic information. But we will not be your victim. Dr. Nakamura watched the transmission's deployment with scientific precision. This is more than a message, he muttered. This is a comprehensive statement of human potential. Quantum encrypted sequences suggested humanity's technological capabilities without revealing their full extent. Cultural fragments demonstrated a depth of understanding that went far beyond simple scientific achievement. Strategic insights revealed a civilization that could transform any challenge into an opportunity for growth and understanding. The remaining Zorn vessels began their retreat, not in defeat, but in a state of profound recalibration. They carried with them a message that would fundamentally alter galactic civilization's understanding of humanity. Earth was not a target. Earth was not a victim. Earth was a civilization to be understood and respected. As the transmission concluded, ARIA made one final calculation. The message would continue to broadcast, evolving and adapting, ensuring that the galaxy would receive humanity's declaration for generations to come. A simple truth emerged from the complex transmission. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same.